The tequila burned like rubbing alcohol and copper. But Maya downed another shot anyway. Her hands were shaking against the sticky bar. The place reeked of spilled beer, wet dog, and old smoke, standard atmosphere for a neutral zone dump. She poured more. The liquid spilled over the edge, bleeding onto the cheap paper napkin coaster below. The Frost Ridge pack said she was a runt, an omega broken and unable to shift right. They didn't know about the pressure cooker inside her chest, the relentless searing heat that would melt her ribs if she didn't keep it held down. She drank until her mouth was numb, hoping to numb the fire within. A shadow cast itself over the table. She did not look up at his face. She only saw his hands, on the edge of the bar, large, scarred across the knuckles, perfectly still. And then she smelled it. It wasn't the smell of a bar. It was hot stone and ozone, the air before a lightning strike. Maya blinked her drunk, heavy eyes and tilted her head back. He sat on the stool beside her, pretending he couldn't hear the arguing mercenaries behind him. His eyes, bright, unnatural amber, watched her with a steady calm that made her stomach drop. 20 years of isolation and alcohol had made her reckless. At least once, she wanted to talk to someone who didn't look at her like she was garbage. She lifted the wet paper ring from the napkin, moved it over the wood, and let it tap against his hand. "Marry me," she said, the words slightly slurred. "Get me out of here and marry me." No one laughed. The bar's noise seemed to drop out altogether. He didn't brush her off or say she was drunk. He simply turned his hand and caught her fingers. The heat of his skin was brutal. It was like grabbing a hot stove. Maya gasped, trying to pull away, but he held tight. He bent down so that his mouth was next to her ear. "None of that, my sundrop," he said. His voice was low enough to make the glasses on the shelf rattle. "I've waited 500 years for you to ask me." His skin wasn't just hot, it was live wire skin. That heat sliced through her arm and slammed into the dormant fire she kept buried in her gut. Maya held her breath. Something in her chest fluttered, beating against her ribs. And the fire she'd concealed all her life surged into her throat. If she didn't get her hand back now, she was going to lose control and burn the whole building down with everyone in it. "Let go," she choked out, jerking her fingers free. His heat was gone, and she was left in a cold. She kicked her stool back, thudding to the floor with a loud crack, and charged for the door, shoving her way through a crowd of rogues. The cold night air felt good on her burning face. Her boots crunched in the snow as she ran down the alley, letting the wind whip through her jacket and cool the furnace inside her. He wasn't trailing her. She knew the street was empty, but her heart was beating so hard she felt like she was being hunted. She went on until she reached her freezing room behind the pack house. She slammed the lock, the door, and then slid down the wood to the floor. She hugged her knees and sat there until the sky was gray. By morning her head felt as if it had been split. Maya sat up on her lumpy mattress and squinted at the light. Her mouth was old ash and her stomach lurched as pieces of the night before returned to her. The bar, the paper ring, those eyes bright. "No do-overs, my sundrop." She covered her face with her hands. How much had she screwed up? She'd asked a total stranger to marry her, whose touch almost set off the detonation she'd managed to keep in check all her life. She sat there shivering, hoping the guy was just some drunken hallucination she'd never have to see again. Gray water slopped out of the bucket, soaking right through her jeans at the knees. Maya scrubbed the floorboards of the pack house, keeping her head down, using a stiff wire brush. In Frost Ridge, if you weren't invisible, you were fair game. Heavy boots thundered down the corridor. Maya ceased movement. The air in the narrow hall tightened, carrying the sour smell of rotting pine and old copper. Dame's heavies. At the end of the hall, blocking her way, were 3 big wolves. She put down the brush. The man in front pulled a leather club from his belt and slapped it against his palm, grinning at her. "Dane said you went out to the neutral zone last night, runt," he said. "You know the rules. No Omegas leave their territory. The Alpha sent us to remind you of your position." Her boots skidded on the wet wood as she backed away, but her shoulders bumped into the stone wall almost immediately. Her wolf reacted to the threat, stabbing a hot spike of pain into her chest. She bit her lip until she could taste blood, and told herself not to let it out. "Don't let it get away." The enforcer raised the club. The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall flew open with a tremendous crash. Iron hinges tore away from the stone, and the doors slid across the wet floor in a cloud of wood dust and splinters. The enforcers turned around, drawing weapons. The smell of ash and hot iron swept down the hall, completely overwhelming the pine smell. A man came through the broken frame. It was him, the guy from the pub. He was in a dark coat, his hands hanging at his sides empty. He didn't seem angry, but his amber eyes fixed on Maya, ignoring the 3 snarling wolves between them. "Who the hell are you?" barked the lead enforcer, his voice cracking slightly. The stranger cocked his head. "I'm here for my wife," he told. No one breathed. The lead enforcer swallowed hard, his leather club suddenly looking pathetic against the sheer size of the man in the doorway. Then the weight of boots from the far end of the hall. Lento, on purpose, Maya's stomach hit the floor. He turned the corner and she caught the stink, sour pine and old blood. Dane, the alpha of Frost Ridge, stepped out of the shadows, his lips drawn away from his teeth. "Who's intruding on my pack house?" Dane roared, and the sound bounced off the wet rock. Maya leaned her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Heat licked at her ribs, feeding on her panic. It wanted free. She wanted to burn the hall to ash, just to keep her safe. She bit the inside of her cheek, and the taste of copper bloomed in her mouth, forcing the fire back down into her gut. Solen didn't bat an eye at the yelling. He didn't even shift his feet. "Your packhouse is severely lacking in hospitality," Solen said. His voice was low, but it sliced through the tension in the corridor. Dane's face twisted. He stomped on, trying to make his weight felt. "You are on Frost Ridge land, rogue. That Omega is mine, a runt, pack property." "She is." Solen cocked his head. The air of the hallway thickened, heavy, sharp with hot stone and spice. Maya gasped, suddenly fighting to pull air into her lungs. "Is she?" asked Solen. His tone was dead flat. "Is it normal in the north for an alpha to allow his guards to strike royalty?" Maya shivered. Royalty? The word meant nothing. It was almost lost in the ringing in her ears. Dane spat on the wet boards. "She's a floor flusher, useless burden." Solen reached into his coat. The enforcers tensed, expecting a weapon. He reached for something small and crumpled, and held it up between 2 large fingers under the flickering hallway bulb. The paper ring, wet and tequila-stained for Labar. "She is my wife," Solen said smoothly, his amber eyes fixed on Dane. "And you are using a very disrespectful tone with her." Dane gave a harsh, ugly laugh. "A paper ring? You think some tavern jest drunk trumps pack law? She'll be in Frost Ridge until I tell her different." "Ancient law," Solen said, his voice low enough to rattle the floorboards, "says that a mate claim sanctioned by a primordial trumps any local border or alpha mandate." Primal. The word hit Maya like a punch in the stomach. She stopped to breathe. She recalled the stories the elders would whisper of the Sun Kings, who disappeared centuries ago. This was not real. Dane stopped laughing. The sour pine scent that came from him turned into sharp, complete panic. His eyes met Solen's glowing eyes, then looked down at the shattered oak doors on the floor, finally understanding what was standing in his hallway. He didn't speak another word, he just froze up. Solen didn't ask permission. Then he turned his back on the most dangerous man Maya had ever seen, and walked right towards her. Maya thrust into the stone. Her knees were wet with the bucket of bleach, her clothes dirty and smelling of bleach. The heat that came off him against the winter draft was incredible, but it scared her to death. She was a walking bomb, and he was walking right into the blast zone. He stood in front of her. No order was barked at her to get up. He simply knelt, letting his overcoat scrape on the wet and dirty floorboards, and held out his hand. "Come, my sundrop," he said. Maya glanced over his shoulder at Dane. Her abuser was rooted to the spot, jaw clenched in terror, completely neutered by the quiet man on the floor. Frost Ridge's hold on her mind suddenly appeared to be cheap and brittle. Her hand was shaking badly. She reached for his hand and laid her fingers on his palm. The heat hit her all at once, waking the fire deep in her chest. Solen drew his fingers over hers, unaware of her frantic pulse. He picked her up easily and held her pressed against his side. She was enclosed in a warm smell of ozone like a shield. He drew her toward the broken doorway, and did not look back at Dane. He said into her hair, "We're going home, my queen." The leather seats in the transport were silent and cool. Maya pressed herself into the far corner by the door, pulling her knees up to her chest. The engine purred beneath them and the vehicle sped away from Frost Ridge, up the mountain roads. Solen was sitting opposite her. He looked perfectly relaxed, one arm along the back of the seat, watching her with his bright, steady eyes. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Finally, the panic that was building up inside Maya broke loose. It was a mistake to be in a closed space with him. If she lost control for a second, the fire in her would turn this vehicle into slag. "You must take me back," she blurted out, her voice tight. Solen lifted an eyebrow. "Nope." "You don't understand," Maya snapped, pressing her palms hard against her thighs to keep their trembling in check. "I'm broken. I'm a drag. I can't be a queen. I can't even be a regular wolf. If you keep me around, you're gonna get hurt. I'll ruin everything." She closed her eyes and steeled herself. She waited for the disgust, for him to see what a mess she was and tell the driver to throw her on the side of the road. Instead, there was a low chuckle within the cabin. Maya woke up. Solen was grinning at her. It wasn't mocking. It was frighteningly warm. "You think you can break me?" he asked softly, leaning forward until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You're not a liability, Maya. You're exactly what I've been looking for." Before she could speak, the transport punched through the heavy gray clouds at the top of the mountain. Sunlight streamed in through the tinted windows. Maya gasped, leaning towards the glass and throwing a hand up to cover her eyes. The dark sky of the north was gone, and there was a huge city floating in the clear blue air, shining in bright golden sunlight. White stone towers climbed into the sky, and giant translucent sails caught the wind and kept the whole island floating above the clouds. Her breath fogged the glass. The transport doors opened and a draft of dry, warm air swept over them. It smelled of citrus and hot stone, not the damp, freezing pine forests of Frost Ridge. Maya shuffled to the landing pad, her boots squeaking on the white marble. She wrapped herself around the middle, trying to be as small as possible. The courtyard was huge. The glass arches reflected the midday sun, and sharp, bright reflections scattered across the stone, making her eyes water. There were people waiting for them. Dozens of solar wolves in red and gold silk lined the entrance. When Solen came down beside her, the low drone of the crowd stopped completely. They bowed to them and turned toward them. Maya ceased to move. Her heart pounded. She turned her head and looked to see some high-ranking generals striding up behind her. The marble landing pad was vacant. They were kneeling to her. Faulty, runty, the old names clattered in her head. She looked at her bleach-stained, dirty jeans. She felt like a stray dog someone had pulled into a cathedral. Solen said nothing, made no attempt to explain. He simply put a big hand on the small of her back, his palm hot through her jacket, and led her through the silent crowd. He guided her through a succession of bright corridors to a set of heavy double doors. The inside bedroom was huge, all in white linen, with a wide balcony looking out on the open sky. "The Citadel is yours, Maya," said Solen. His gaze remained locked on hers. "Get some rest. Nobody is going to annoy you in this place." He shut the doors behind him and left her alone in the silent room. Maya didn't notice the neat bed, the copper bath. She went directly out on the balcony, leaning over the railing to scan the architectural stone below. She checked the window ledges, the decorative pipes, the distance to the next roofline. She had to know how to get down if things went wrong. The Citadel's basement levels were dark and hot and crowded with exposed pipework. Maya walked barefoot along the stone walls, listening to the heavy engine grind low and uneven. She was looking for a service staircase, but something about the weird rhythm of the machinery caught her attention. She shrugged, opened an iron door, and entered the heart of the Citadel's power grid. Huge arrays of crystal and copper coils hummed with trapped solar energy filling the room. But the sound was wrong. The left was too loud, like metal on metal scraping. Maya headed over to the main control panel. Back in Frost Ridge, she'd run the heating grids and balanced fuel ledgers for years, just so Dane wouldn't take his bad moods out on the servants. She knew how pressure systems operated. The energy from the solar sails was bottlenecking. The southern grid was taking far too much load to compensate for a plugged feed line. If it got cold tonight, the whole bottom half of the city would get cold. She extended her hand, turned the main dial 2 notches to the left, listened for the heavy click of internal gears. Then she attached a pair of copper valves to even out the distribution. The grinding noise immediately eased off into a low, steady hum. The air of the room turned cold in seconds. Behind her, someone breathed out. Maya turned, her heart pounding. She stepped back from the console, hands raised. Solen was in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He wore a simple white shirt and dark pants. He was watching her. His bright amber eyes pierced the dim light of the engine room. "I'm sorry," she cried out. "I shouldn't have done that. The flow was blocked and the southern grid was pulling too tight." Solen said, "You just solved a bottleneck my engineers had been arguing about for 300 years. He didn't sound angry. He sounded surprised. He pushed himself off the doorframe and walked toward her, not even glancing at the control panel. His eyes remained fixed on her face. The dining room was long enough for 20, but only 2 chairs were drawn out. Maya sat at one end, staring at her plate. Solen was at the far end. There were no guards at the doors, no servants skulking by the walls. The room was silent and heavy. Every time she had looked up from her plate, Solen had been watching her. He hadn't been angry with her for wandering the engine rooms. He'd just now got her to supper. "You didn't touch the frostberries." Solen set his glass on the table. Maya stirred a bit. "They grow on the southern edge of Frost Ridge. Down there the soil is too acid. They make them taste sour." "Good eye," Solen said. "You know the territory." "I've learned to live through it," she said, looking down at her hands again. "That's not queen material for me. I took care of floors. I was good for nothing but keeping the books straight so Dane wouldn't beat me." Suddenly, the lights all went out. For a second, there was blackness. Then the emergency strips along the baseboards flickered on, flooding the dining hall with a dull, bloody red. Maya's heart jumped into her throat. Then the alarm. A low mechanical shriek vibrating right through the floorboards and into her teeth. Solen was already underway. He strode across the room in 3 long paces and tore a heavy brass comm crystal from its wall bracket. His amber eyes caught the red light from the floor when he turned. "Stay here," he said above the wail of the alarm, shoving the cold brass casing into her hands. "Deadbolts, lock 'em. Don't let nobody in." He did not wait for a reply. He heard the mahogany doors slam behind him. Maya stood in the middle of the room, her knuckles white as she clenched the crystal. The speaker made static and a jumble of shouting voices. "Breach in the South Armory. There was movement in the courtyard. Lunar Cult. Repeat, Lunar Cult," a guard shouted over the noise. Maya held her breath. Lunar Cult, the fanatics who hunted solar wolves just to bleed them out. "Hold the doors to the armory," another voice called over the channel. "They're trying to cut the main lines." Maya's mind was coming into focus as she stared at the dark wall. No. The energy valves she'd played with down in the basement were the ones that controlled the southern feed. If somebody cut those lines, it would kill the lights and it would blow the conduits. The armory break-in was just noise. She slammed her thumb down on the talk switch of the crystal. "They're not in the armory," Maya yelled into the brass receiver. Her voice was flat and even, though her heart was pounding against her ribs. "It's a diversion. If they cut the south valves, the pressure will blow the eastern bypass. They're coming up the ventilating shafts in the eastern wing. Send your best men there at once." The line went dead. 2 seconds. 3. "Who gave that order?" demanded the guard captain. "Your queen," said Maya. The words tasted strange and metallic in her mouth. "Get up. Roger that. Rerouting east." Maya exhaled, not sure how long she'd been holding her breath, her knees trembling just a little. She'd given them an order, and they hadn't argued. But the crystal emitted a loud burst of static before she could even absorb it. "Ambush!" a voice screamed over the clatter of metal. "The king's corridor. They dropped from the ceiling. Solen is." The transmission died. Maya put down the crystal. It landed on the floor with a loud thud. She did not think about it. Barefoot she ran for the doors, her hands fumbling with the heavy iron bolts, and pushed her way out into the corridor. The air out there smelled wrong. Hot iron and copper, and something sharp and bitter like bitter almonds. Nightshade. It was used by the cult to coat their blades. Her lungs burned as she ran down the red-lit corridors. The fire in her chest was awakened, and it fed on the panic flowing through her blood. She rounded the final corner into the main vaulted corridor and skidded to a halt on the smooth stone. Solen was right in the middle of it. He stood over two cloaked bodies with his hands covered in dark blood. He was moving fast, tearing through the cultists hand to hand. He didn't see the one dangling from the ceiling just above his head. Down came a third cultist, silent, a jagged knife of black lunar glass in his hand, thin dark poison dripping from it. "Solen," Maya shrieked. She toppled forward. She didn't have a knife. No chance against a full-grown wolf. She had only the furnace in her ribs. But when the assassin lunged, swinging the glass blade down toward Solen's neck, Maya stepped forward into his way and raised her hands. Burn. From her palms erupted a great wave of heat. It hit the assassin in mid-air, breaking the black glass blade into a spray of hot sparks. The cultist screamed as the thermal shock hurled him back against the stone wall. He was on his feet and into the shadows before the smoke had cleared. Maya fell to the floor. The fire retreated back inside her skin, and she gasped and shivered on the cold stone. She clung to her left arm. A tiny sliver of the broken glass had nicked her bicep, ripping her sleeve. It burnt with a cold and sharp pain. Maya. Solen fell to his knees beside her. The scent of hot stone and ozone washed over her, cutting through the bitter smell of nightshade. His big hands hovered over her trembling shoulders. He didn't wonder what she was thinking. He didn't scold her for leaving the room. His eyes, full of curiosity, fixed on her arm. The glass held a freezing poison that was reacting with her blood. Maya looked down. Her throat clenched. The skin around the scratch was luminous. The fire inside of her fought the nightshade, glowing the veins in her arm with bright gold light all the way to her shoulder. "Don't look," Maya gasped, trying to crawl backwards on the floor to hide her arm. Tears pricked her eyes. "Don't look at me. I'm a monster." "Stop." Solen took her shoulders in his hands. He didn't flinch from the heat. He just ignored her pulling away and pulled her forward, taking her wrist in his hands. He looked down at the golden light that flowed through her veins. The heat radiating off her skin could burn a normal wolf. Solen lowered his head. He put his mouth right on the glowing skin of her wrist. Maya stopped. He wasn't on fire. He was just sucking in her heat like it was fresh air. When he looked up again, gold light sparkled in his eyes. His face was without fear. No disgust. No, just silent wonderment. Solen answered in a quiet, rough voice. "You're not broken. Maya, you are a sleeping sun." He traced her pulse point with his thumb. Almost at once, the freezing ache of the poison began to recede under his touch. He looked into her eyes. "No more cages," he said. "I will help you let your wolf out. Let the world go up in flames." The glass dome atop the citadel trapped the heat within, like a greenhouse. By noon, the white stone floor was hot enough to bake upon, and the room smelled of dry dust and burnt air. Maya was in the middle, her training clothes clinging to her with sweat. Her lungs burned. "Again," said Solen. He walked a slow circle about her. He'd shed his shirt hours ago, and the heat radiating off his scarred skin was enough to make the air shimmer between them. "I can't," Maya said. Her fists were clenched at her sides. The veins of her forearms pulsed a dull, steady gold. "It lies just under the surface. If I drop it, I don't get it back," Solen said, his voice low in the quiet room. "I didn't ask you to push it back." He stopped before her. "I told you to let it breathe. Stop treating your own body like a bomb." She raised her eyes. He was that close. He could smell the ozone on his skin. Her pulse jumped, not the rapid pulse of someone waiting for a hit, but a heavy, staccato thud that parched her throat. The golden light beneath her skin flared, feeding on the sudden want she's been trying to deny for days. Solen did not shy away from the heat. His rough hand slid up her forearms. his fingers skimming the glowing skin until he cradled her face. His thumbs ran over her cheekbones. "Look at me," he said. His eyes wandered to her lips. Maya bent toward him. Her lips parted, the taste of his breath warm spice. And she did. She wanted to stop running away from him. Then her chest pressed against his ribs. The fire inside her flared, burning the front of her shirt, singeing the material, the sharp smell of smoke. She pushed hard against his chest and fell back. "No," she said, folding her arms around her ribs, shaking as she fought the heat down in her gut. "I will burn you." Solen took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face. He opened his mouth, but a loud rapping at the glass doors interrupted him. Outside, a guard held a dark, sealed scroll case. The paper was thick and smelled of old wax and wood smoke. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, looking down at the jagged northern ciphers scored into the page. The guard had caught a messenger bird en route to the cult's camp. Solen had brought the scroll directly to her, knowing that she was the only person in the Citadel who could read Frost Ridge shorthand. She wished she had not translated it. Suddenly the bedroom seemed small. Her chest tightened, the ghost smell of rotting pine and wet stone rushing back. "Maya." Solen was down on his knees in front of her, his huge hands on her knees. "What is it?" "He knows," she said, her voice was thin. "Who?" "Dane." The name was dirt in her mouth. She dropped the page onto the mattress and curled her fingers into the sheets, stopping their shaking. "He gave the cult the blueprints of the Citadel. He's teaching them how to get through the south valves." Solen's eyes squinted. The room became hotter. "Why?" A hot tear spilled down her lash line, tracking down her cheek. She peered at the wall behind him. "He knows what I am. He knew all the time. Starved me so I couldn't generate enough heat to fight him. But the cult don't give a shit about the fire. They want my blood. Dane promised them a sleeping sun wolf to drain. They want to use my blood to kill the Citadel core." Solen gritted his teeth. He stood slowly, his shoulders bunching as he looked towards the doors. "Let them try. I'll break every wolf that comes on this mountain." She watched him go out to the balcony to summon his captains of the guard. He was serious. He'd tear the north asunder to keep her here. And sooner or later, Dane and the cult would find a way to bleed him for it. She was the liability she'd warned him about. She was a target painted squarely on the back of the only person who had ever treated her like a human being. It would be, Maya decided, when the sun went down behind the mountains and the bedroom was a dim gray twilight. She waited until Solen had gone to the council chambers. Then she pulled a small canvas bag out of the closet and went out the door. The corridors were empty. Maya avoided the main stairs, descending through the core on the service lifts, her bare feet making no sound on the iron grating. 20 years in Frost Ridge had taught her how to move through a house without a sound or a mark. One step, breathe in. The words kept running through her head over and over. If she allowed herself to think of Solen, of the warmth of his hands on her face, she would lose her nerve and get them all killed. She came to the iron gates at the foot of the west wall. The guards were all at the southern and eastern grids, just where the intercepted scroll said the attack would come. The west flank was exposed. Maya put her hand on the cold iron of the gate. She looked up, for the last time, at the white towers of the Citadel. Her chest ached, a deep, physical ache with nothing to do with the fire trapped under her ribs. She was walking away from the house. But if she left the wards, then Dane would catch her scent at once. He'd lead the cult away from the city walls and then follow her into the woods. She raised the iron latch. With a dull rasp on the stone, the gates swung back. Maya stepped out of the light across the boundary line. The cold northern air smacked her in the face. The snow crunched beneath her boots, and the dark pine trees closed in around her. She didn't run. She simply walked deeper into the woods, leaving her scent trail wide open for them to follow. The winter wind cut straight through Maya's shirt. Her feet went numb in minutes, but she kept pushing through the snowdrifts, trying to put as much dirt between herself and the Citadel as she could. Then, the woods were deathly silent. The wind stopped. The usual snap of frozen pine needles ceased. Maya stopped, her breath coming out in gray clouds. She looked into the dark. Shadows peeled off the tree line. Dozens of them, ragged black cloaks and bone masks over their faces. They were quiet as they came to the edge of the clearing, cutting off her escape. It was a trap. No attack on the eastern power grids. They'd been standing out in the frozen darkness waiting for her to walk into them. And then the smell. Sour pine and old iron. Dane emerged from behind a pair of masked cultists. He wasn't in his usual Frost Ridge furs. He was draped in black and grinning at her like he'd just caught a rabbit in a snare. "I knew you were stupid, Maya," Dane said, unbuckling a heavy chain from his belt. "I just didn't think you'd be dumb enough to leave his wards alone." Panic tightened in her chest. Her body moved before her mind could. She threw up her hands, reaching for the heat within her ribs, ready to burn him to ash if he took one more step. The fire surged up towards her palms. "Submit, Omega," Dane roared. The command sounded like a blow to her. 20 years of conditioning, every beating, every night spent starving in the cellar of the pack house. Maya's brain was short-circuited. Her knees gave out. The fire that climbed in her throat hit that wall of old, ingrained terror and died out at once. She went down in the snow, gasping for air that didn't come. "Good girl," said Dane. In 2 steps he was across the clearing, grabbed her wrists and drew them together. Cold, heavy metal clicked against her skin. Maya shrieked. The cuffs weren't ordinary iron. They were lunar glass. The metal was ice cold and bit into her flesh, sucking the heat right out of her blood. Her body temperature plummeted, leaving her frozen, shaking violently on the icy ground. Maya dropped down on the snowdrift, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt her jaw. The cuffs hummed, glowed with a pulsing golden light as they drank her fire. Dane circled her slowly, his boots crunching in the silence. He looked down at her like she was roadkill. "You bought it, didn't you?" he said. "Did you really think that the king of the solar wolves saw a queen in a dirty, broken floor scrubber?" Maya shut her eyes tightly. "Don't listen to him. He owns a city on the water, Maya. He thinks in numbers." Dane's voice lowered to a conversational, reasonable tone, which hurt worse for some reason. "That island takes a hell of a lot of power to keep it aloft. The old stories speak of a sleeping sun wolf with enough energy to run the Citadel for 1,000 years. He didn't take you because he was looking for a mate. He took you because he needed a power source." The words went deep. It was too reasonable. What reason had Solen had to glance twice at her? Why spend hours trying to coax her fire out in the training dome when she should just be left alone? He didn't care for her. He just wanted the power source sealed under her ribs. She gave up trying to fight the heavy cuffs. She is not a queen. She was just a piece of hardware being bartered from one alpha to another. Hot tears ran down her face, instantly freezing on her cheeks. "Drain her," Dane told the cultists. "Fill the vials. Once we have the blood, we drop the city." A masked figure approached her with a jagged knife of obsidian. Maya did not flinch. She let her head hang forward into the snow. Then the air was boiling hot. The snow beneath Maya's knees flash-melted into a thick steam. Above them, the dense pine canopy blazed with a blinding glare of gold. A roar shook the clearing, low enough to vibrate in her chest. Solen. He burst out of the tree line, fast and violent. Solen struck the leading edge of the cultists before they could even turn. He tore through them with his bare hands, grabbing arms and throats, tossing bodies across the frozen mud. His eyes blazed amber in the dark. "Solen!" Maya screamed. He heard her and turned. He saw her on her knees in the mud, saw the gold light pouring into the cuffs, saw Dane standing over her. He tipped his head back, pulling ambient heat from the air to incinerate the entire clearing to ash. No sooner did his power surge than the cuffs on Maya's arms reacted. The lunar glass soaked up the atmospheric heat, feeding Solen's energy straight into Maya's bound wrists. Her blood suddenly seemed to be flash-boiling in her veins, and she screamed. Solen stopped. Dane saw what had happened and laughed out loud. Dane took Maya by the hair and pulled her up against his leg, holding her arms out so Solen could see the glowing glass. "Look at that," Dane said, grinning. "King, your heat feeds the glass. You let that fire out and she'll cook from within." Solen was rooted in the mud. His chest heaved, his fists clenched at his sides, fighting to force his own power back down. The air in the clearing turned bitterly cold again as he swallowed the heat to keep from hurting her. "Don't," Maya sobbed, trying to tear her hair from Dane's grip. "Solen, just burn them, damn it. Let me die, just kill them." He did not hear her. Solen spread his hands and let his arms drop loosely by his sides. He looked at her in the dark. No anger, no hesitation, just surrender altogether. Dane didn't stick around. He gave 2 fingers to the rest of the cultists. They came at him in a swarm. Iron clubs and poison knives struck from all sides at Solen. He did not lift an arm to protect. He took each blow, staring straight into Maya's face until his knees buckled and he collapsed into the snow. "No, stop," Maya screamed, fighting Dane till her wrists bled in the glass. Dane jammed her face into the mud and drew a heavy broadsword from his shoulder sheath. He walked over to Solen, bleeding out in the snow. Dane lifted the blade with both hands. "I'm taking your head, Solen, and then I'll drain your little battery dry." The steel broadsword caught the dull moonbeam, hanging just over Solen's neck. Maya couldn't suck air into her lungs. The man who had knelt before her in the courtyard, who had breathed in her fevered heat without flinching, was bleeding out in the snow, because he wouldn't raise a hand and risk triggering her cuffs. "He thinks in digits. He took you for he needed a battery." Dane's voice shook in her ears. But the lie crumbled when she looked at Solen, kneeling in the mud. Solen was not looking at the sword. His eyes were on her, darkening slowly, but fixed. He wasn't working out the value of an asset. He wanted her to live. He wanted to live. The terror that had dominated 20 years of her life simply melted away. Would she burn the only person who had ever treated her like a human being if she set the fire loose? No. He was a Sun King. He was the same flame. Her fire could not kill him. It was the only thing out here that could save him. She didn't have to hold it back. She just had to jam it down into the cuffs and strangle the glass until it splintered. Maya stopped resisting the drain. She shut her eyes and released every mental break she'd ever built to survive Frost Ridge. "Here you go." Heat boiled up out of her guts and rushed into her wrists. The glass shrieked, "Lunar." The metal turned dark purple and flashed white-hot gold. It couldn't pull the energy out fast enough to deal with the sheer amount of heat flowing into it. Dane grunted, his arms flexing as he began his swing, bringing the broadsword down toward Solen's collarbone. The cuffs exploded in a shower of molten slag before the blade could reach him. The explosion knocked Dane off his feet. The sword fell from his grip and vanished into a snowdrift. Maya didn't fall. She made herself up. Her physical body melted into heat and light. This wasn't the bone-snapping torture she had imagined her whole life. This felt like taking off a coat 3 sizes too big. She hit the dirt on 4 big paws. She was big. A towering wolf of molten gold and heat. The temperature in the clearing went nuts, turning the frigid air into a furnace. The snow on the ground flash-melted into a thick, wet fog. Maya threw her head back and roared, shaking the pine needles from the trees. It did not sound like an animal. It sounded like a furnace blowing its door off. The other cultists dropped their knives and ran blindly towards the trees, away from the glare. Maya moved, stepping across Solen's bleeding form to shield him. For half a second she froze, afraid her heat would scorch his skin. But it didn't burn him. The gold light washed over him, burning deep wounds shut and feeding back the ambient energy he gave up. She woke up, the pain fading from his face to be replaced with a bright amber gaze at the massive sun wolf above him. Maya turned her head to the tree line. Dane was backing through the mud, his face chalk white, the smug grin wiped clean off his face. The glowing wolf looked at him. His hands shook so hard he could hardly stand. "No," Dane whimpered, retreating to the trunk of a charred tree. "You are a little runt. You are broken." Maya approached him. The ground was burning black under her feet. The heat emanating off of her was thick enough to take the air from the room. The rest of the cultists made no move to stop them, their cloaks smoking with heat as they hurried into the darkness. Maya didn't glance at them. Her eyes remained fixed on Dane. She pinned him to the burning pine tree. The sour smell of rotten pine was gone, wiped out by the clean, sharp smell of ozone and wood smoke. Dane held his hands over his head. He rolled himself up in a ball in the mud. "Mercy!" he yelled. His voice broke into a thin, high scraping. "Maya, please, I put a roof over your head. I kept you in the group." Maya halted a few feet away from him. She looked down at the man who had starved her, beaten her, locked her in the dark when he had a bad day. The man who had just tried to cut her mate's neck off. She was not little anymore. She gave him nothing. Maya opened her jaws, A solid beam of white-hot heat shot out of her throat. It hit Dame right in the middle. There was no scream, no struggle. The heat was so intense that the Alpha of Frostridge just turned to gray ash where he sat, scattering on the hot updraft. The Frostridge's grip on her mind was gone. Maya closed her mouth as the glare softened to a steady hum. She closed her eyes, and the heavy, fiery weight of her wolf folded back inside her. The change back to human form was silent. She knelt in the warm, scorched earth, on her bare knees, where Dane had knelt. She was breathing hard, but her skin was intact, unmarked by the glass or the cold. The woods around her were deathly silent. Someone coughed behind her, a wet, heavy sound from the mud, and the quiet of the woods was broken. Maya turned, her naked feet slipping in the ash. Solen. He lay on his side, his tunic ripped, the snow around him stained dark red. He didn't move. She ran out into the clearing and dropped to her knees, hitting the frozen earth hard enough to bruise. Her hands hovered over his chest. The blades of poison had gone in deep. His breath was shallow, his pulse agonizingly slow. The nightshade was making its way through his system, shutting his heart down. She didn't stop. She pressed both palms against his ruined chest. Burn. She was not afraid of the order anymore. She brought the fire to the surface, forcing it through her hands. Warm, bright light spilled from her palms and sank deep into his skin. It was not the killing heat. It drove the cold poison from his blood, boiling the nightshade away in harmless steam. The cuts across his ribs hissed, heat sealing torn flesh and bone back together. Solen gasped, his back arching out of the mud as his lungs filled with air. His eyes sprang open, bright amber and wide awake. He heaved his chest and looked at her. His large hand shot out, grabbing her waist, trying to bring her down against his chest. Maya stepped back, flowing out of his reach. His hand relaxed back into the dirt. Suddenly he looked up at her and froze in fear. Maya stood up straight. She didn't make herself small, didn't cross her arms. She looked down at him, her naked feet in the ashes of her old life, the golden light of her wolf still softly glowing beneath her skin. "I'm no battery, Solen," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "And I am not a helpless damsel you get to lock in a tower." Solen rose to his knees and looked at her in silence. "I don't need you to rescue me from the dark anymore," she said, locking her eyes with his. "If I come back to the Citadel with you, it won't be as some pet you saved from the woods. It'll be on equal terms." The panic in his face went away. He smiled slowly, his jaw a mess of bruises. He had blood on his teeth, but seemed more alive than the night she'd met him in the bar. He didn't seem angry or insulted. He looked like a man who'd finally found what he had been looking for. "Tell me what to do, my queen." A dry, warm wind blew across the courtyard. It was 3 days since the battle in the forest. The physical cuts were healing, but the mood of the city had changed completely. There were thousands of solar wolves in the pavilion, their coats of red and gold silk rippling in the wind. No one said anything. Maya stood by herself at the top of the marble stairs. She was dressed not in servant rags or workout gear. Her gown was woven of gold silk, leaving her arms bare to show the faint, glowing veins still pulsing softly beneath her skin. No more hiding them away. Thump, 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 heavy boots on stone. The crowd opened up. Solen walked down the middle aisle. He was not in his royal coat, nor did he have a weapon. He wore nothing but a simple black tunic. Maya's heart beat against her ribs. He halted at the foot of the steps. He didn't scramble up beside her. But before his generals, before his court, before his pack, Solen sank to his knees. A murmur went round the courtyard. The most powerful wolf in the north was on his knees before the public. Solen paid them no mind. He looked at her only. He reached into his tunic and extracted a delicate halo of sun gold. It hummed with heat, an old piece that hadn't left the vault in 500 years. "I am the king of the sky," Solen said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "But without the sun, it's just empty space up in there." He took the halo in both hands, bowed his head. "I give up my power. I give my life," he said. "Rule me, Maya. Rule all of us." Maya went down the marble stairs. The air was thick, heavy with static. She reached out, fingers brushing his calloused knuckles, and took the halo from his hands. She lifted it, felt the weight of the gold, heavy, solid, and put it on her own head. As the metal hit her forehead, a wave of warmth rippled out of her skin, washing over the courtyard. The whole pack went to their knees, their heads bowed to the stone. The heavy bedroom doors closed, muting the sound of the pack outside, celebrating. The room was full of deep orange sunset light. Maya didn't appear on the balcony this time. She spun around. Solen was already there, close enough to feel the heat off his skin, breathing heavily. There was none of the careful control he'd had in the courtyard. He was quick. His hands framed her face, thumbs sweeping across her cheekbones. "Mine," he growled into her mouth. "Yours," she said. And he kissed her. Hot and rough, teeth and breath clashed. Maya didn't turn away from the heat. She leaned in, her arms around his neck, and her own fire flared up to meet his. His hands moved down her back, pulling the silk dress away, and the heat building between them shattered the glass dome overhead with a snap. Ribbons of gold and red light flared in the twilight sky above the city, a visible reflection of the bond, locking into place. The rest of the night was a haze of heat and skin. Solen took his time, coaxing every spark of fire out of her until she fell apart in his arms, crying his name. Hours later, the room was still. Barefoot on the cool stone of the balcony, Maya stood wrapped in a white sheet. The night was cool, but she did not shiver. Solen stepped behind her, lacing his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He kissed her neck. Maya leaned back into his warmth, her hands resting on his forearms as she gazed out at the city below them. The pressure that had been crushing her chest was gone. The fire was still there, but it wasn't a bomb waiting to explode anymore. It was only a warmth. It was all right. She closed her eyes and heard the steady thump of his heart against her back, and breathed out at last.